Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 26th of November, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the European opening, and most markets looking a little bit better this morning. Asia, we're seeing China off a little bit, but and Australia off, but most markets up. Looking at the dollar index, we're still bullish in all three time frames, and we've got more short-term targets. So it does look that strong dollar is just still going to dominate. And the euro below the cloud on the 60-minute and the daily charts means we're still seeing euro weaker against the dollar, although it is up slightly this morning. Against the yen, the dollar looking stronger again, and this is normally a lead indicator for the dollar. And looking at sterling, with all the Brexit negotiations, we're still pretty flat against the dollar and bearish on all three time frames. So market not really getting too excited about this signing of this deal. Looking a little bit better against the euro, but still fairly flat. Against the Swiss franc, much the same picture, and against the Aussie dollar, just looking weaker there as well. Bitcoin up this morning, but after a really bad week last week, is not really making a great deal of difference. And if we look at the S&P 500 index, we sank lower on Friday, we're down 0.2%. So just plugging these new lows, still looking pretty bearish for the US market. The Nasdaq was down 0.7%, sinking lower there as well. So no clear downside targets really. We do have this one still given back in early October hanging over us, 2% lower. If we make new lows, then we've got a very big downside target, 11% lower. So we're definitely not out of the woods yet. And looking at the Dow, we do have clearer targets here, down 2.5% and 6% potentially. 9 and 13%. So lots of downside targets is worrying for the market. The Russell 2000 was flat on Friday, so smaller stocks weren't falling as much. We're seeing the futures up sharply this morning. The S&P up 1% and the Nasdaq E-mini up 1.3%. So market set to open much higher, which has got the European markets up this morning. FTSE up 0.8% and the 250 up 0.4%. DAX up 1.5%. So we are seeing a strong showing in Europe, and the CAC 40 up 1.15%. So we're looking stronger in Europe, though the picture has turned pretty bearish. Looking at the Japanese market, we're up slightly there. The Hang Seng was actually up 1.6%, and the Chinese market continuing to fall back to short-term bearish. Still our big concern, and these long-term downside targets, lots of them, is still worrying. If we see China making new lows, then expect big falls. And the Indian market was up, so looking stronger there, and the Aussie market lower, just turning long-term bearish there. Brent Crude had a terrible week last week. We really fell away, especially on Friday. We saw massive falls down. Bit of a bounce this morning, but we are bearish on the medium and short-term charts. We're back above the $60 level, but crude in the 50s, having been nudging 90 not so long ago. WTI $51, so it sank lower as well on Friday. And we see here the week we had really big capitulation there in the price. US nat gas futures came right back to $4.11. It's looking quite toppy now, having done that big jump. It's what happens next. Will we break higher or will we break lower? We've got two key levels now to watch. And if we look at gold, gold sitting at $12.25, just holding on to its bullish position, and silver actually up as well. US 10-year yields sitting at 3.06%, so just that bearish run continues, coming all the way back to 3. But we did put in these targets with the recent rises, so it'll be interesting to see how we go. And if we look at the German bond, it's down this morning just slightly. Taking a look at the markets, we see here this data. That data was all coming from Thomson Reuters icon on this screen. If your private user Metastock Zenith will feed you the same data. Here we're now looking at Yahoo data, so from Yahoo Finance. Here are my world indices. When we see that there, just taking a look at the Nasdaq on Friday, we had some quite big performances. Apple is the big one that was down another 2.5%, and we're seeing how this relative outperformance of 25% or so outperformance against the Dow this year has just come all the way back to 5%. So it's underperformed the market by 20% in the last couple of weeks. So Apple now is the big thing to watch. Google we're down 1.3%, and Amazon also down just under 1%. So we are seeing quite big falls there. Facebook, of course, in the news, they're now sitting at 131. They were down a further 2.2%. It's hard to believe Facebook's come all the way from above $200 back to $131, and we've got downside targets to 105 and 108. So basically, Facebook shares have had the potential to virtually halve. So quite worrying there. Just taking a look at some of the other techs, we've got Microsoft were down just slightly, and Netflix were down 1.2%. And if we look at Tesla, down 3.6%. So having outperformed the market of late, just falling back. Looking at the Aussie market, we see here Afterpay Touch Group up 5.7%. So we a little bit higher there. Super Retail up 4.5%. So again, but a lot of these charts looking pretty bearish. Taking a look at the downside, we've got some pretty big falls here. Independence Group down 7.7%. Mineral Resources down 6.65%. So we really are seeing a lot of turmoil across the board there. China mostly down, as we saw. And Hong Kong was actually strong. The Indian market, we're seeing a handful of stocks up. Hindustan Petroleum obviously has had a pretty bad time on the oil price, but is up this morning. And looking on the negative side, we see oil, natural and gas. So it's a pretty mixed picture. Coal India also falling away there. A lot of commodity prices falling, and that's had a big effect there too. The Nikkei 250. 225 looking stronger, and if we take a look at Europe, we start with the FTSE 100. Again, these prices all coming in from Yahoo Finance. So looking at, we've got Fresnillo up 5%, Barclays up 2%. Centrica had a terrible time on Friday. They were down 2%, up 2% today, but they were really fallen right out of bed. And we still do have downside targets here on Centrica. We just see the prices coming in here, and not many stocks down. So BHP is down 1.8%. Melrose down 4.7%. So generally speaking, looking pretty bullish. And FTSE 250, we're seeing here Premier Oil up 4.5%. And if we look at the other side of the coin, we've got Rank Group down 4.88%. Looking across in Europe, this is the Eurostock 600 list, where Eurofins are up 8.5%. So we're looking stronger there. And looking at the downside, we've Melrose are topping the list there. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.